Thank you for joining Reading Horizons today for our webcast, Dyslexia, Best Practices for Instruction and Intervention. We are excited to have Donell Pons, Literacy Coordinator at American International School of Utah, and all of you with us today. After Donell's filmed presentation, she will be here in the office for a live Q&A. Be sure to add any questions you have throughout the presentation in the chat section. If this is the first time you've watched a webcast with Donell, you might have missed her discussing dyslexia screening, assessment, and identification in the classroom, as well as some great books and resources about dyslexia for educators in her previous webcast, Dyslexia, What Every Educator Should Know. That webcast is available here on the Reading Horizons YouTube channel or in the webinar section of the Reading Horizons website. For those of you attending live today, we're doing a free giveaway. We'll be giving away 3 power banks like those seen here on the slide that you can use to charge your phone. Enter your name and state code in the chat section to enter the drawing. We'll announce the winners at the end of the webcast, so be sure to let us know you're here with us. Also, thank you to our customer success team for joining us on the chat today. If you have not officially registered for this presentation, be sure to take a moment to sign up at readinghorizons.com/webcast. We will be sending a link to the final recording to registrants, and you'll be able to download the slide deck from the presentation and request a certificate of attendance. And now, we are pleased to present Donell Pons and her presentation, Dyslexia, Best Practices for Instruction and Intervention.
Thank you for joining us for this third webcast in our series regarding students with reading challenges. My name is Donell Pons, and I'm the Literacy and Reading Coordinator, as well as the ELL Director at the American International School of Utah, serving about 1,300 K through 12 and international students here. If you are joining us for the first time, we welcome you. And as you can see, we're in a classroom. So those of you who've been watching the other webcasts, we've moved here to be in the classroom because we're going to be talking about everything that happens in the classroom for you as a teacher and for those students who are struggling with reading. We also encourage you to view our previous webcasts regarding the details of defining, assessing, and teaching students with dyslexia, including those appropriate programming to help students with dyslexia and other language-based challenges. Those webcasts entitled Teaching Reading, the #1 job of every educator, and Dyslexia, What Every Educator Should Know, are available on the Reading Horizons YouTube channel and also on their website. Today we're going to add to our understanding of dyslexia by giving an overview of IDEA with details on the IEP and Section 504 processes. Those are a lot of acronyms. We'll get into what they are, and for many teachers they're aware of them, but maybe there's still some mystery surrounding how you use them and maybe some confusion within your schools. So we'll try to clarify that a little bit for you and also give you a little homework to look for some of those things on your own to help clarify those roles, but they're important for you as the teacher. They're important to everyone who's in a school. So within this discussion, we'll also be looking at the role of response to intervention, or RTI. This plays an important role in providing appropriate services for students who struggle to read. It's that all-important system that helps identify, put some things into place to see how the child will do, and then move that child along if need be. And this will lead us to look at the most appropriate classroom accommodations for students with reading and writing challenges. Again, we'll try to answer all of the wonderful questions that we were given receiving this important topic. As we begin discussing IEPs, 504s, and appropriate accommodations for students, I want to reference a fantastic website called Wright's Law. We'll also give that on our list at the end, but if you want to jot that down, it's Wright's Law. But it's a great website for any teacher, a student, parent, administrator. If you need the information and it's the latest and the most precise definitions regarding the laws surrounding students with learning challenges, this is a great website, and I recommend using it for everyone. Now let's get back to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. We refer to it a lot in education. The primary purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is to ensure that all children with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. And that is including special education-related services that are designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. This includes the Child Find mandate. Child Find requires all school districts to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities, regardless of the severity of their disabilities. This obligation to identify all children who may need special education services exists even if the school is not providing special education services to the child. So now you can see why it's so important. This is the foundation for our kids. They'll come into our classrooms, our cute students, and they'll come from all different backgrounds, and we're mandated with Child Find to help them if there is a reason why they're not progressing or able to meet the curriculum. So that shutdown child, the child who doesn't seem to be engaging, the child who really doesn't want to come to class, It's our obligation to find out why class is so uncomfortable for that student and what we can do to help. It's part of our job. So that Child Find mandate requires each state to devise a practical method to determine which children are receiving the needed special education services and which children are not. So we have to come up with a way of identifying these students. And some schools are really good at that and others are struggling. Schools are required to locate, identify, and evaluate all children with disabilities from birth through 21. And this includes all children who are suspected of having a disability, including children who are or who receive passing grades and are advancing from grade to grade. So Part B of IDEA requires that schools, educators, they do their part, otherwise you don't get vital funding from the federal government. So that's the teeth behind the legislation, is that we need to be doing that in order to receive the funds that we need as schools. So all of this is under Child Find duty. In other words, it's what we need to do. So neither the statutes nor regulations establish a deadline by which time children who are suspected of having a qualifying disability must be identified and evaluated. So in other words, it's ongoing. But it also means that we shouldn't shirk that responsibility. We do need to make sure we're doing it and doing it in a timely manner. But if employees know or have reason to suspect that a child has a disability, these schools and employees have an affirmative duty to act on the child's behalf. So again, everywhere throughout the law, it says it's our job and our obligation. Now, a child with a disability is not automatically eligible for special education and related services under IDEA. To be eligible for a free and appropriate public education under this law, a child must meet two criteria. So the child must have a disability and by reason thereof needs special education and related services. And over time, courts have held that the child's disability must adversely affect educational performance. And here's another area where it might get tricky for you, because somebody might say, well, just how much of a difference does there need to be and how adversely does it need to affect? So there's some dialogue in there that sometimes gets tricky for teachers. And after identifying those children who may need services, we need to do all the necessary evaluations to make sure that the children, and at no cost to their parents, receive appropriate services. We also have, or should have in place, a child study team at your school that is looking at students who have been identified, who are maybe moving through a system of supports. And that's a team that you should have access to as well for advice and to be able to ask questions. And if you have the student who shows up into your class and doesn't have a 504 or an IEP but is struggling, these are places you can go for resources. So you will start the dialogue with that group of people in your school that should have the background to look at all the different pieces that are contributing to the student's education. So that's your Child Find team. Remember, data collection, we need to see a lot of the information. So immediately when you see a student struggling, be sure to hang on to some key pieces of homework or things that are going to reference what it is you're talking about in terms of the struggle when you talk to administration or you talk to that child study team. Again, we also want to know about dyslexia, those students who have dyslexia, because we know that they have very specific language-based challenges than our other students who may be struggling for different reasons with reading and writing. So remember that in the process of evaluation for dyslexia, although we've gone over this before in the other webcasts, it's good to keep in mind because you may be in a middle school class or a high school class and you still have students who have not been identified. They don't have a 504, they don't have an IEP, and you're their front line. Here you are in the classroom, 7th grade English class or whatever level, and you have a student who is struggling hardcore with reading and writing, and you know this is different from anything else you've seen. And it's just with that. Maybe they're really bright at everything else. Let's look for those basic things for dyslexia. Does this student have a family history, including student's health and developmental history? Look at it to see, is there a family history with reading and struggling with reading? Go back and look at the school records and test scores as far back as possible. Ask somebody in your building who has that information. And again, I'm going to stress this one. Make sure as a teacher in any subject that you have the reading records for your students available to you. It will be invaluable to let you know exactly where your student's level is. This is something your administration should be doing for you. But if they're not, go ask and be persistent and enlist the help of other teachers to ask with you, because pretty soon they'll have to listen to you. But that is invaluable data for you. The reading records of your students needs to be very important to all the teachers. It can tell a math teacher so much about how hard a student is going to struggle with story problems and other parts of math. It informs every subject. There are specific evaluations for dyslexia. Things that you're looking for are phonological awareness, being able to get that sound to that symbol, if that is just not happening for your student, a key indicator. Single word decoding, and then the reading comprehension, the spelling, written expression and comprehension, and then look at the handwriting. When a student struggles with handwriting, that is telling us something, it is informing us of things. And then there will also be things that come with it, as anxiety, that sort of checked out student, all kinds of things that can also be affecting that performance in the classroom. So when you're at parent-teacher conferences, share concerns and discussion with those parents. Find out what they're seeing at home. So oftentimes things that happen at school might not happen at home and vice versa. So I often walk into classrooms where teachers feel like, well, I can't know what's in a student's IEP because I'm not in special education. I don't have the right to know that. That's not true. As the educator in the classroom providing services and you have a student in your room who has an IEP, you definitely have a right to that information. You should have it. It should be given to you at the beginning of every term so that you know how to best meet the needs of that student. And remember, you should have a dialogue with special education if you have any questions. How do I best service this student? I'm trying this, it's not working. And you should be having a relationship, a working relationship. It only works if we do that. So one of the biggest myths is that students must receive services for at least 4 to 6 weeks in an RTI system to be eligible for further testing. This is simply not true, so I'm going to put an end to that one right now. Depending on the nature of the suspected disability, request by a parent, teacher, etc., RTI may or may not be recommended. Either way, RTI should never be used as a reason to delay additional testing, or also the thing we call waiting to fail. If a child has a disability but does not need special education and related services, the child will not be eligible under IDEA, but may be eligible for accommodations and protections under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So let me make that clear here. So we have our IEPs, and that IEP comes under IDEA, that legislation that we were talking about. With it comes funds. And because of that funding that comes with it, you need to do special tests to make sure that the child does qualify. The other section that a student might receive help under is something we call Section 504, which I just referred to, and it's under the Rehabilitation Act, and it's a civil rights law and prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability by state and local governments. And this one doesn't have the finances that come with it. There isn't the specialized programming, but this is more accommodations that will help the student to be able to function in the classroom to meet the same curriculum as everybody else. This is an example of a 504 plan. So Section 504 is intended to ensure that children with disabilities have equal access to education. These accommodations are things the school could offer to a student to help them function in the classroom and do better in the classroom. Children and parents have fewer procedural protections under 504 than under IDEA with the IEP. So if you violate an IEP, meaning the student doesn't get services or things are not tracked appropriately or they don't receive the appropriate programming, there are federal guidelines, and if you come up against these, then that's where it gets legally very sticky for the school. So you have to always have your paperwork in place and make sure services are being provided exactly how you say they should. With 504, it's more loose than that, and they don't have near the safeguards. So IDEA includes an elaborate system of procedural safeguards designed to protect the child and parents. And these safeguards include written notice before any change of placement and the right to an independent educational evaluation at public expense. Section 504 does not include these protections. When we're serving students with a 504, the 504 does not require a diagnosis. It should be in writing, and accommodations and modifications should address the impairment or the reason why the student is struggling in that classroom. The determination of whether a student has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity must be made on the basis of an individual inquiry. Anyone can ask about this, about a struggling student. Well, if you witness and see that a student is struggling, and we need to act on it. And there needs to be some place where that information is kept and stored and the 504 is recorded for that student. Because these can get really loose at a school, a 504, and it just depends on how well they are managed at your school. But it can be a vital thing for your students. And let's talk also about when that student graduates from high school, because a lot of my students didn't realize this, nor did their teachers. Because I've had really well-meaning and well-intentioned teachers. That's what we're in this business for. We care about kids. And I've had teachers say to me, well, I just meet the needs of this student. He doesn't have a 504, or she didn't have an IEP, but I can meet their needs in the classroom. The problem with that is you haven't provided a protection for that student, that when they leave your classroom, even though you've been awesome with that student, you don't know where they're going. Or say dad gets a different job and has to move mid-year, and then they go to a whole different state. If you haven't put that protection in place, the legal document, either a 504 or an IEP, that tells everyone at a school, hey, look, this student deserves special accommodation and help, then you've really left that student without any protections. So as well-meaning as that is, it doesn't do the student any good in the end. The other thing is when a student is graduating from high school, having a record of a 504 or an IEP is invaluable in starting a dialogue on the college level for accommodations that they will need to be successful in college. So again, even though we're well-intentioned, We want to make sure that if a student needs a 504 or an IEP, that we're getting it for them. We're starting the process and we're discovering that. Here's another thing I find teachers say, well, I wasn't sure that what I was seeing was severe enough to warrant discussion of an IEP or a 504. If it's affecting that student ability to be successful in your classroom in any way that might be, then it does need to be addressed. And we'll let the system of either testing for 504 or an IEP decide whether or not that student ends up with more formal IEP or accommodations in a 504. But the testing is vital. We have to start the process rolling in our classrooms. Typically teachers, that's the way it is. I've been in the classroom too. It's a hard job, and you are everything to these students. And you have so many things that you're trying to accomplish in that classroom, and then you also have this extremely important duty of these students who have gotten this far. They're in your classroom and they still need help. Nobody's helped them or identified them. It is never too late. And we're witnessing that at my high school, in the high school here and in our middle school, where we're polling kids still who are allowed to get too far reading 3 and 4 grade levels below grade level. And when they come to us, we try to get the help they need right away. It's going to take us some time, so maybe we'll have to put a 504 in place to make sure the classroom is bearable while we try to get their reading skills up. But this is a process, as you can see, and a system that needs to be in place across the school where we're all helping each other be able to meet the needs of our students who struggle with reading and writing. So we have a lot of things going on here that as educators can often get tricky, especially in your school setting when you have different people providing different information for you. But as an educator, again, being clear on the law and on IEP and on 504, those are 2 really important things to be clear on because they affect you in your classroom and you should be aware of them. It sounds overwhelming when you talk about that, but think about it. The time we spend identifying and evaluating our students early on saves us so much time, money, effort, and the lives of our students later on. It really, when you put it that way for administrators, there really is no other way to do this than to do it early on and to be obligated and to be good at it and to make it part of our job.
So when Zoe first started kindergarten and even when she went into preschool, I did see signs of her struggling to read. And so I went to the teacher and I asked for help. She was tested and I told her some things that I was seeing, like reading words backwards and getting letters mixed up. And they said that it was normal, that kids will grow out of it. And so even though she was tested and they saw problems on paper, I was told that it was something that would eventually go away. I decided to homeschool Zoe because I knew that there were issues, there were problems with her reading, and I wanted to be able to focus on that and to help her. I'm not trained in reading. I'm just a mom who wanted to help her. And so I used all the resources that I knew about, but I knew within the school system there would be people who were educated in reading struggles. And so I did the best that I could with homeschooling for a year, and we did make progress in that year. But then when the charter school that she attends right now, when they called and said they had a spot open, then we came here. And I again went straight to a reading specialist and said, this is what I'm seeing in my daughter, we need help. Everything that she was saying resonated since kindergarten with Zoe, and I thought, we figured it out. You know, that light bulb went off for me too. I felt happy that we knew what to point our finger at on how to help her. They also did some testing and they said, we have a program, and they explained it to me, and I looked at how it worked on the computer, and I loved that it was independent work too, because that also built up her confidence. And so she began to work with the specialist here at the school, and we work on it for 20 minutes at home too. And her confidence grew, and she began to read on her own, and even to her siblings too. Now that Zoe is in 4th grade, I have noticed a difference in her reading. Zoe loves learning about peoples, places, and things. She loves learning about sports, and she will come and talk to me about U.S. history, or she will come and talk to me about Wilma Rudolph, you know, things that she loves about. And so I just think she has a love of knowledge. When she reads, it's not just that joy coming from someone reading to her. She's discovering on her own and talking about it with others.
It's helping me become a better reader because I can pronounce words easier and I can read the books easier too. I like Anne Frank, and I like reading about the sports, and I like going on to the next level because it makes me excited.
Zoe has a lot of support from her school. She has support from me, First off, she has support from a reading intervention teacher who's constantly checking to see if everything's running smoothly with it, and then her program itself. As a parent, I have always wanted to work as a team with educating my children because I respect the background of those who have spent their time getting an education in it, and I also value myself as a teacher too, and so I finally feel like I'm working as a team with educating my child. That's what I wanted.
So as we move along here, what I want you to be aware of is once we have the IEP in place, once we have those 504 accommodations, now what do? I'm a teacher in my classroom. I'm doing the best that I can. I may have 60 students. I may have 30 students. Whatever the number, this is going to be hard if I have a lot of students who have various accommodations. So what we find is a breakdown here in communication with the teacher, and we'll try to fix this chain for you of communication and then also what to do in your classroom to better serve your students. So here's a couple of things that will happen. You'll receive that list of students at the beginning of the term. And there may be a few with an IEP, there may be a few with 504 accommodations. Again, you're going to want to make sure you have received all the information you need as an educator. Did I get all of the accommodations for that student so I'm aware how to best serve that student? And do I have all of the 504 accommodations for those students who have Section 504? The other thing that you're going to want to do is, at the beginning of class, we want to have our students feel like they can talk to you. Because again, this is not easy. Even if a student has been in the system for a lot of years with either an IEP or a 504, they're not going to feel comfortable. Most students do not feel comfortable coming up to you and advocating and saying, hey, look, these are my accommodations. And even after I send an email out with my son's accommodations to his teachers, it's still hard for him to go up to those teachers and talk about accommodations, even after we've kind of broken the ice by sending the initial email. And good teachers still will read the email, get involved in all the things that go on in the classroom, and forget the accommodations. But again, I'm going to say this because you teachers, we have an important role to play here. Let's try to normalize. I'm going to use that word a few times. Let's try to normalize accommodations as much as possible. And what I mean by that is making sure that everybody in the classroom understands that whatever somebody needs to be successful in the classroom is going to be just fine in our room, and that everybody's going to be getting what they need, and that's your number one concern. And I liken this with my own students when I start a class. I say, hey, look, I've got glasses. I need these to be successful in this classroom. You guys would not like it if I had my glasses off because I wouldn't be able to see your faces. So if I take those glasses off, just because no one else is wearing glasses, and I'm trying to fit in with everybody else, I'm not going to be as successful in this classroom. So I'm going to put my glasses on, and I'm going to keep them on because it's okay to have glasses in my classroom, even if I'm the only one wearing glasses. You're all good with that, right? Nobody has a problem with that. That's what accommodations are in a classroom. And as a teacher who tries to normalize that for his or her class, trust me, it makes a world of difference. And it's something we can do. You lead that classroom. They look up to you. You're the one who's going to be teaching them for an extended period of time. When you start early with that and say, hey, look, everybody's going to succeed in this room, and we're going to do it differently. And that's going to be okay. And it's going to start with accommodations that look a little different for everybody. But that's going to be all right with our classroom. And you normalize that. Those are the most successful classrooms that I've seen. I can't emphasize this enough because even if we say it once, it's not enough. Even if we mention it twice, it's not enough. This is something we do every day to normalize behavior such as accommodations in our classroom. We talk about it all the time. So every time we introduce another project, accommodations will be talked about again. Every time we do an activity within the classroom, if someone needs an accommodation, we're going to make sure it's normalized again. So this is something we just adopt as a classroom. It's the discussion and the language that we have, and it makes the classroom safer for our students. And that's the bottom line. Our students can't perform at their best or their optimum if they're feeling afraid. And a student who has accommodations, trust me, feels afraid. Because in other settings, it has not been okay to receive their accommodations. And when they're young, maybe they haven't had near the history with it as our older students, and we're going to see some interviews with a student who talks about that very thing. But by middle school, high school, there have been enough traumatic experience in the classroom that it doesn't matter how many times you go over accommodations, it can't be done enough to make that environment safe for those students who have accommodations.
It wasn't until about 4th grade when most of the kids started focusing on reading, and it was all about reading and writing. And I noticed I couldn't do much. I could barely do the assignments. It was way too hard for me, and I spent most of my class just staring at the assignments rather than trying to work through it because at that point I'd given up. We were given these spelling tests where it was a total of 25, 30 words that the teacher read out aloud, and we had to write them down. 4 of these tests in a row, all of my questions were wrong. It was discouraging. It kind of crushed me at that point, because I looked at everybody else in the room and they were succeeding, they were doing great, but it just kind of crushed my hope at that point. Most of my teachers don't really know what dyslexia is and how to help. What really made the difference was getting the 504 in place and finally getting these accommodations. So finally, I started feeling like I may be good for something here, like I may be actually to do something. And that gave me quite a bit of hope. But like, we got it in place, we got my 504, but that was half the problem. The other half was me trying to advocate for myself and telling my teachers, hey, I need this accommodation, hey, I need this, because they weren't really up to date on what my needs were. But I wouldn't do that because I wanted to be like all the rest of the students. I felt like I could do it on my own. Like, I wanted to be independent. Like, I feel like I didn't need this. If I was actually good for something, I wasn't going to use my 504. You know, it was hard to get past that. I think what good teachers do is provide more, I guess, psychological help for the student, because it really bears down on you. So saying, hey, just because you can't get this particular assignment done, it's hard for you, and I mean, that doesn't mean it's not hard for everyone else. It's particularly hard for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're stupid at all. If a teacher told me that would be everything. I'd really think of myself differently now.
So these are some ways that teachers can help students to receive their accommodations. So we might have a notebook where a student could, in the front flap of the notebook, have a list of his or her accommodations that should be provided in the class, and then just discreetly open that notebook when they're given an assignment that maybe has skill sets in it that should be met with their accommodations. They can open that flap of the notebook for the teacher, briefly show the teacher again and remind of the accommodations, and the two of them can work out how those accommodations can be met. This is done best if the school supports the student in this process and doesn't make it the job of the student and parent, but rather it's something system-wide the whole school has adopted. Teachers are familiar with the pattern, and they know that when a student opens the notebook and has a list of accommodations, they're familiar with that system. Works best that way. Then there are other ways where students can sometimes put together a one-page list of their strengths and the challenges that they have and hand that to the teacher so they have it on paper. I talked about the email that my son and I choose to send to teachers at the beginning of a term to be able to help with this process. But we should have some system in place, whether it be the notebook or something else, where students can talk to their teachers about their accommodations. Another thing that I like to see in a classroom for students with accommodations, at the beginning of a term, it's a nice little icebreaker to send around a sheet that has just a few questions, and you can add some that are just yes or no or multiple choice. You don't have to make it all writing. But then somewhere on that sheet, you're listing, what do you consider to be your greatest strengths? What do you consider to be your biggest challenges? So that students can list that for you, and they get familiar with you too. And it's not very hard to do that in a classroom. It takes you just a few minutes. But I guarantee you that most of the students, and this is what I find every time, most of the students write down, what are your biggest challenges? It's reading and writing. Hands down, most of my students will give to me, which I find very interesting, and it goes along with all of the research that we have presented to you in the first and second webcasts. So again, we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those students with their IEP and their 504 in the classroom. We have some way of knowing what those accommodations are. So as we proceed and we talk about accommodations, you're just going to add this in to what you already know about your students. Oh, now I have some extra ideas for adding accommodations. In terms of instructional practices, that's why we're here in the classroom today. We're going to be dropping in a lot of different materials so that you can see what accommodations look like in the classroom and offer you options as teachers within the classroom. Some of these you may be already using, but some of them may be new to you. So remember to think about it in your classroom when the students first come in. Remember the environment that's in the classroom. So you're setting up the classroom with seating arrangements that are optimal for your students. So sometimes we're working in small group. We might have students at tables and working in small group and have them involved in various tasks. So you can have some in independent work, you can have some that are reading a novel together, and you can have some working with you in a smaller group that are doing metacognition exercises and talking about what's going to happen in terms of a writing project. So again, trying to think of the classroom in groups where you can group students, not for just abilities, but for needs. So I would always put it that way too. We're not going to be grouping on ability, but we're going to be grouping on need. Who needs a little more discussion about the book in order to be thinking of writing topics? Who needs a little more time discussing what happened in the book? And you just divide it that way. So much easier for us to think in those terms, and I think students will be happy to participate in a situation like that. We also need teachers that scope and sequence. It's where you're headed in the class, so that students know they're going to be able to receive accommodations because the teacher knows where the teacher's going. So we're not going to get any surprises, but rather we're going to have a whole outline and a map. And in fact, because I care so much about my class, you're going to have access to that map of where we're headed. So if you need anything on that map, let me know ahead of time. I'm happy to provide it. So that's another thing about scope and sequence. It isn't just great teaching practice, but it also provides a roadmap for students who are struggling to be able to say, oh, I think I can do this. But if you have no idea where you're going, and that student every day is a surprise, can you imagine how terrifying that is as a student? But if I've got a scope and sequence to be able to see that at this point we'll have a book, at this point we're doing an article, and sure, things might change a little bit, but can you imagine how comforting that is to a student? Again, good teaching practice aside, it's comforting to your class and to your students to know where they're headed, so they can see that in advance. And maybe some things on your roadmap or things they've done in the past that they're looking at it and saying, I'm glad we're doing this because I have a history with this. I'm going to be really successful at that. So it not only provides a roadmap for things that they may be uncomfortable with, but also things they may already have in their toolbox, and be able to say, hey, look, this unit's kind of hard right now, but down the road, I've done something with this. I'm going to be able to handle it. So again, that scope and sequence provides a lot of things for different people in the classroom. It also allows the student to be able to line up audiobooks if necessary, and that ought to be done by the school. But a lot of schools are not providing these, and so we also ought to give parents and students an opportunity to have them before the day of. So there's nothing worse than a student coming into class, teacher introduces that we're going to do this great book and I'm so excited, but today's the first day you've heard about it and you don't have an audiobook. Ah, that's terrifying. So again, that scope and sequence, or letting the student know ahead of time, these are the books that we're going to cover. We'll provide them, which would be ideal through things like Bookshare that we could use, or Learning Ally, where the text is highlighted that a student could provide in class on his or her own. But we also could do some graphic novels, and there are some great graphic novels that could go along with the book. So having options, when you list the book, we'll have audio options, we'll also have graphic novel options. So if they want to have a graphic novel that they could look at to give them the background of the story, what you're giving your students is a way of approaching the text. And it's helpful for not only the students that you know about with accommodations, but remember there's always a certain percentage of your students that have needs you've never even heard about. So it provides it for them as well. Okay, so a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of accommodations for students, some of these might take some planning, and some of these won't take planning. Some are low cost, some might have a cost associated. So we're going to have a variety of things for you to see. When a student is struggling at their table or their desk or their seat and they don't want to ask you for help because that can be a very embarrassing experience, or they've just had a lot of experience with it that wasn't very positive. So one way to eliminate the stress or the anxiety from that situation is to have just a quick, easy 3x5 index card, and it has either a yellow dot, a red dot, or a green dot. And when the student is at a green dot, the student is working independently and feels just fine with how they're handling the work. When it moves to yellow, the student has a question. At the corner of their desk, they'll just put the 3x5 card on top that has yellow, and that indicates to you as the teacher as you're walking around that there are some questions the student has. If you see the red dot on top, that means the student is in dire need of some help. They're just not going to be able to proceed without you. So it kind of helps you as a teacher be able to prioritize who in your classroom needs your help the most, and then be able to work your way around the room, and it helps students feel free to ask you questions. When you have something on an accommodation that says preferential seating, what exactly does that mean? Most of the time I see it in classrooms where a teacher says, oh, that means that student sits right up next to me. Now that's not always what it means. Sometimes that might be what it means. Maybe that student does need to be at the front of the classroom either visually to see things off the board or to pay attention or to hear. But sometimes preferential seating might mean the student likes to be a little bit further back in a quiet corner. Working within that system, or wants to be seated at a table where someone else will take the lead on things. And oftentimes that preferential seating means that a student would like to be in a discrete place within the classroom to use accommodations where everyone isn't watching the use of accommodations. Something else I want to show you that's low tech that we could have in our classroom is here on my whiteboard. I have a lot of room on the whiteboard, and I've dedicated this space in the corner here. It's a weekly tech tip, and so I could have a student be in track of this. I don't even have to do it myself. And the student's going to write each week a tech tip for the whole class about one technology piece that makes getting classwork done easier, okay? And it can be something as simple as me saying, I'm going to write up here, Mercury Reader. This is a great tech, so I just wanted to make sure I put it on here. And this little tech piece will take any web page that a student calls up, say from the New York Post or New York Times if you're having them research, and it'll clean up the text so that it's easier to read. Well, that's really easy, and it's free. And the whole class will love learning about it. And you might want to put that student who has accommodations in charge of the weekly tech tip, because then they become the expert in something. It's just an idea. It's a way that you can make it even better. Then also right here I have a place for shared documents. So we'll share the student, I'll share my email, this teacher's email, and if you have an assistant or anybody else, share their email here. And then shared documents get written here. So we're talking about Google Drive documents. I'm going to put that here. I know most of you are probably using these, but if you're not, please do. Google Drive documents. So when you have a piece of writing in your classroom, you don't have to have the students writing on a separate piece of paper and then arduously trying to come up with the words and get them correct and all of that. Instead, everybody has a Google Drive document. Now, some classrooms don't have as much technology as others, and I understand that. So you may have a limited number of laptops or devices, and so you'll have to adjust this to your classroom. At my school, we're a tech school, so everybody has a laptop, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing this. But again, you may have a limited situation. Or you may want to go down to the computer lab and build this into your curriculum maybe once a week, where you get on the computers and do your writing then. So here's what I'm going to tell you about the Google Drive documents. If you're not using them, this is a really easy thing to do. It's connected to your Gmail, and you have your Google Drive documents, where you and the student are in the same document. Once the student shares it with you, it's the two of you, you can see the student's document. I edit writing all the time this way. In fact, I don't do it any other way anymore because it's so good. And then no one in the classroom has to know what changes or corrections you're giving the student in the Drive document. It's completely anonymous. The other piece is if you don't have computers available, the student can go home, open up a Drive document, put the work in there, and then when you receive it the next day when you're in class, and he's already shared it with you instantaneously, you can make comments within there. Again, same purpose. Nobody sees a paper with red all over it. That humiliation of that whole process is gone. And it's a lot easier for students who have word-based challenges to work within a document like this. So I think this one is fabulous. In fact, when I did a school newspaper and ran it, I had a student with a language-based learning challenge, and this was the only way that we were able to get him to do solid article writing. If I had him writing it down on paper and transferring, that just would have been impossible. And it would have eliminated his opportunity to be on the school newspaper, which doesn't need to happen. So always look for tech ways that you can help students reach the curriculum, because there's a multitude of them today. We're lucky to have that. So those are two just easy ones right on the board that I would have. Another thing that I want to talk about too is organizational strategies. And this is an easy filing system and doesn't cost you anything, and it's really small and compact, but I can get 30 students into one of these. And what it is, if you have papers or things that you just insist are in your classroom and they come back every single day, have them put them in here, every student. So you don't have this one for just that certain student who can't bring anything back. It's sort of a humiliation. Nope, every student has one. And then you just keep those things that you really want to see come back every day in here. And then no more tears for our younger ones who are inevitably going to lose that paper that's so important to the classroom and be really embarrassed. And also no humiliation for the middle and high school student who still can't manage to bring that paper back because it is a processing and organizational challenge. Eliminate it. Put it in here. And then you have it every single day. And keep this file in your classroom. Really low cost, effective way. I know most teachers do this, but I'm surprised at how many still don't. So that's a low-cost thing to do. But you can also help your students by having an organizational folder that is set up. It's a 3-ring binder, and it has different folders that help them maintain their homework and move it through the process of what is something I'm working on and something that is due. And that can be handled by you as the teacher, helping put together that folder at the very beginning so that students know that they can stay organized. The folder is all set up for me, and it's very understandable and intuitive, and it works, takes the homework and pushes it through a process for the student. So here's another thing I want us to remember too as educators, that if I have 2 great pages of information I want to share with my students, maybe I sat up all night and I have this awesome outline for how to do a PowerPoint, and then I've got a terrific paper that has a rubric on it. I'm so excited to share this with my students because I worked so hard on it. And it's really good actually, but I share it all at once. What do you think happens to my students? It's information overload, even if it's awesome. So here's what I always say to teachers. Whatever you have, if it's your 2 pages, drop it down to 1/3 of information. So right away, I'm going to set down that second page. I'm just going to put it away. and I'm only going to have the one page. Now introduce just a third of that page and make sure all the students understood. So I'm going to start with the PowerPoint piece first. This is what I want you to do. I have an outline of how you're going to put your PowerPoint together. And explain to the student, I only want you looking at this one sheet tonight when you go home to do this exercise. Just use this one sheet. It's how to do the PowerPoint. I walk you through it entirely. Make sure you look at it, feel comfortable with it, work on your PowerPoint. I've got this fantastic rubric to grade it by, but we don't even need to worry about that right now. So alleviates for that student that gets information overload. I'm not going to give you too much, yet the student who's really eager to please knows that, oh, I'll get that second piece tomorrow. Great, I can go on with my assignment. Now here's another step that I think is very important at this point. I feel like I've introduced it pretty well. Everyone seems to have gotten it, but here's a way I'm going to guarantee success for most of my class. I'm going to have one of my students come up that has said, I'm okay with coming up in front of the class, that's already known. And I'm going to have them come up and I'm going to say, okay, now, can you tell everybody how you're going to proceed with the assignment? I mean, tell us everything. And that student loves it because there's always someone in the classroom who likes to act things out. And they go through what they're going to do with the assignment for the night. Okay, well, I'm going to be at the kitchen table. I'm going to have my dad's laptop. I'm going to be working on PowerPoint. Oh, great, so you're using PowerPoint. Does everybody here have PowerPoint access to that, or do they need another program? Right there, you're answering questions you're going to get. Those will be coming to you tomorrow after a kid has struggled all night because that kid was too worried about what was on this paper and never thought, I don't think I have access to PowerPoint or any way of doing a PowerPoint. But they never told you because they were overloaded with the information. So walking it through with another student is fantastic. This takes me just a few minutes, and already we're answering vital questions for a lot of our students. It's another key piece. The other thing is I want teachers to know that we're good intentioned again about note-taking. So one of the things about note-taking is we think as teachers, if the student isn't writing it down, then they're not really getting anything from the notes. Now that can certainly be said of part of the process. Notes are fantastic if you can write really well, your spelling isn't poor, and it's easy for you to transfer that information directly down. They're terrible for students who work with language-based learning disabilities. So there's going to be an accommodation, and should be, for students where note-taking is horrendous. Your notes are going to be provided to them. That's one of the easiest accommodations that can be provided. Again, there may be students in your room that this has never been provided for. They should have the option as well. Then they cut and paste into that notebook. They can keep it in the notebook just like everybody else. But now when they go home, they can actually read the notes, because nothing's worse, and my kid would bring it home every time. Here's the math notebook. The teacher says I have to look at pages 2 through 3 for the test tomorrow, and we'd look at it, and I couldn't make out a thing on it. It's just that double, humiliation. I couldn't keep the notes in the way that they should have been kept, and now I'm going to fail the test because I can't read my notes. We don't want to do that to kids, set them up for failure. Now, another way to review those notes, because the teachers, they'll say, they didn't write it, so how are they reviewing? You highlight, and that's one of the activities that the student can do, is that we're going to highlight certain things in that notebook. So everybody that's written it will also join in with those who have pasted it, and we're going to highlight certain things, and you might want to have 2 colors or 3 colors depending on the information in the notebook, and one will be for vocabulary, and you can highlight it in whatever color. Another one will be for information on procedures. You might want to highlight that a different color. So as the students are highlighting, they're working their way through the notes as well, but in a way that's going to be meaningful and useful to them later. So I love teachers, we have these great ideas about note-taking and things, but just remember about the learning process and some of the challenges that our students might be having as to whether that is helpful anymore or actually harmful to our students in our classrooms. So another thing we want to talk about is taking vocabulary apart. Vocabulary is a huge part of what our students encounter in the academic world. So there's vocabulary associated with all kinds of subjects: math, social studies, art, humanities. And we know from a lot of research that this vocabulary, even if you know vocabulary within one area, it doesn't transfer very easily into another. So vocabulary is daunting. In other words, you have to have a lot of different areas with vocabulary knowledge that doesn't relate to each other. So this can be a very challenging point for students, especially if there's a language-based learning disability or you have dyslexia. So we can do word lists. We have an example of an 8th grade word list where you have the word with the base root, so you can take that apart and show students where meaning comes from. You can also pull it from connected text, the vocabulary from, say, a book like Ender's Game, if that's what you're studying, and have the text or the words there connected to the text for the student. So they're written, they can see them, they're being familiar. We also have academic vocabulary, things that are part of mathematics, and we'll put words there that we can derive meaning from them. And then let's say we want to even have a list of power prefixes. those prefixes that are found readily in a lot of words that we see. There's meaning in the root and in the prefix and in the suffix. There's no harm in providing these visuals in our classroom, and in fact they're really good teaching, to take words apart and to make meaning out of them. I think it's so exciting when our students finally start to feel comfortable enough with words and taking them apart that you see them even asking you questions like, I see this repeated over here and it's on this word here. Why is that? I love to hear those questions. That means we're really doing a good job when our students bring those questions to us. And even if we don't know the answers to those, finding the answer together is fantastic as well. So we don't always have to have the answer. And in fact, I love it when I introduce something that causes all of us to think and to think about where do I find the information or the answer to that. There are also some really great websites that have 100 words every high school student ought to know. That's kind of fun. I might print those out on large sheets of paper and keep those on the wall. And as a class, when we have extra time or independent study, they might be able to use some of those words on the wall. If I've shown them how to take it apart with etymology and use the prefix and the suffix and the root, and you can make all kinds of activities, and that's a quick, ready activity on your board that you could have. It's also kind of fun for students to compare their vocabularies and say, geez, am I familiar with those words? Do I know them? And it gets us really thinking about how challenging it is to hang on to those words. So one of the things that we want to encourage is doing etymology. So I'm going to drop here quickly on the board a pyramid, because this will be a good exercise for us. It's this easy when we're explaining words to our students. And in English, a lot of times our students say, English is so confusing. There's so many parts to it, and there are these different languages that are part of it. And yeah, it can feel really confusing. But English is really actually pretty systematic and organized. But it's a challenging, complicated language in some ways because of history. So I'd like to explain to our students that on the base of the pyramid, where you have most of the information you're going to be working with, we have something that we call Anglo-Saxon English. And this comes from a longer lesson out of Unlocking Literacy, the book that I've mentioned before. But it's Anglo-Saxon Basic English. That's what most of our words are. This is what we traffic in every day. It's, I am going to the store. I'll be at school. It's most of those conversations we're having. That's this basic English here. Not many components to the words, we all understand them. The reason why that's most of our English is because the common people in history of putting our lands coming together and from Europe over to the Americas, that Anglo-Saxon was what the common people could use. So it's going to be foundational to the language. Then we move up and we have Latin. And in Latin, we have our prefixes and our suffixes. And so we can make more words. They get a little more complicated. We can make more meaning. And then at the top, we have Greek. And this is science. Most of our words in the scientific world are going to be Greek. And then we have that Latin and Anglo-Saxon. When I put it in this context for the students and say, that's pretty much all the words you're going to be using, is right here in this pyramid. We may have some French in there, but we're going to recognize it. We'll have a little German in there, but this is pretty much it. And then take a few words that the students give you, even from the work that they're doing in class, and say, let's put it on here, guys. What do you think? You give me a word, and does that fit into Anglo-Saxon, Latin, or Greek? I'll tell you, you have a room full of kids, and I've done this with 7-year-olds on up to high school age, where you think they're just, nothing's going to get them anymore. They love this activity. And pretty soon I've got them all throwing up words to me, and we're putting them on here, and we're taking them apart. And it's fascinating how quickly, because trust me, students want to know this stuff. They love it. And when you can make it accessible to them and interesting to them, they'll be totally engaged. So there's a lot more we could do with vocabulary to involve our students. They have an interest in it, and it really matters to them, and they know that it's important. So I love this activity, and again, we'll give you that information that you can download to see where to get the book that provides the foundation for this teaching strategy. So here's something I want you to take away too. About some really educated people who have a vast vocabulary, you've got about 80,000 words at your disposal. That's a lot of words. So I can't tell you enough how important it is to help our students be able to access words and make meaning out of those words. And particularly for our students who can't hang on to a large body of memorized material, being able to pull apart certain words and know what the parts might mean is very comforting. And it provides a foundation and a base, because I might not be able to memorize all of those words, but I can hang on to some foundational pieces, and that's why the etymology is so important. Offering students an option instead of a writing assignment doesn't cost you anything, but again, you're going to have to be prepared ahead of time so that you can offer that student that option when it comes to that writing assignment. So another way that we can help our students with language-based learning challenges is by having word strips that are on the desk. And these little tiny word strips that they can already provide a word bank, so they don't have to come up with a word, and then they're already written, so they don't have to be writing it down. And you can use these to manipulate words for poetry. It can also be responses for questions. And you can provide the students all kinds of words on those strips for different activities that you're doing. But I have found this to be extremely helpful for our students who have word recall issues, who really want to participate, but the challenge of having to write it down, and then did I spell it correctly, just impedes the whole process. So eliminate that, have a little word strip on the desk, and then they can just work with it at their desk. And it's private, nobody has to see it. Now, when they're done and they have something they love, have them take a picture of it with their phone, or you take a picture of it, and now you have an example of the student's work. They still don't have to write it. This is an activity that, trust me, all of the students enjoy. And I love it because suddenly that student that would never ever dream of writing poetry because I can't write this, I don't want to do it, suddenly has the ability. You've got all the words there on the desk, let's just move them around. Another thing that I'm going to show you is this, a sticky note. These things are amazing. They can do a lot of different things. So what we find is with our students who have language-based learning challenges, that they can often see if they can't see the code, that letter code is challenging, and hopefully they're getting help for that. But in the meantime, oftentimes those kids who have dyslexia and other challenges are really great with other patterns. One is color. They can recognize color patterns in ways other students can't. So let's build on that one for them. So I would use sticky notes in a multitude of ways in my classroom to help with this and to give those students a leg up, and it helps everyone to see it in a different way. But choose a color, and let's say we're doing verbs, and I might make all the verbs yellow if I list verbs. And let's say we're going to do parts of speech in a sentence. So I might make my predicate or my subject a different color. And then I'm going to make, say, the object of that word a different color. So now I've just used 3 different colors of Post-it note. And I'm going to have the students brainstorm on words that would fit under each category. And then say I want the students to build sentences. Now at their own desks, they can have a few of these as well and be working with those sentences at their desks. So they're getting comfortable. But then I know that my kid who has dyslexia or another language-based learning challenge is going to be able to participate on this one. They won't have to guess at what the subject, the verb, or the object is because they know the color. If they need to be prompted, I'll simply say, we need the object or the blue. Can you put a blue or object word in this sentence? And they can immediately go for it. I have seen students with language-based learning disabilities and dyslexia be successful at this in front of the whole class and feel awesome. And all I did was a small accommodation that didn't cost me much at all. Think of other ways that we could use these sticky notes within the classroom setting to bridge that gap for more students. So it's a fantastic accommodation, other ways to use it. Here's another thing I want us to be aware of with our whole classrooms, that you're probably going to be teaching, like most of us, to the top of your class. So we do this all the time as teachers. We usually have 3 or 4 what I like to call jackrabbits. They just get everything done very quickly and they're fast. And so typically teacher feels an urgency. My jackrabbits are done, what do I do with everybody else? If I'm a good teacher, everybody's engaged, and my top students are going to keep telling me that it's too slow for them. So this is always going on in a classroom. It's hard for teachers. And here's one easy thing that I think we can implement right away in any classroom. It doesn't matter the subject. It so happens that I watched this happening in a math class and found a way to devise a way that could help everybody. So it can be any classroom. So here's what happens. Teacher explains what we're going to do for the day. And of course, the 3 to 4 top students, sometimes it's 6, get it quickly and they're ready to move on. But we have the middle of the class, and then there's going to be the bottom third. How do I keep them all engaged and going on this subject? And so what you'll do is you'll teach a concept, and I want you to do it more than one way. And I want you to slow it down. So even if you think you're going slow enough, take your information and pace it again by a third. And then take it and pace it again by a third. There is no harm in slowing down to make sure everything is done properly and on pace for the students. So you can already see I'm slowing down to make sure that we're all understanding what I'm saying. We always talk faster, typically in a classroom, than most of the students are comfortable with. So this is good for everybody. That top section of the classroom is going to get it right off, and we know that. So we're going to make them repeat and retell for the middle section of our classroom. This can be done at small tables, and it's called conversation. So you'll say, go have a conversation about what I just gave you as the subject. You get 5 minutes for the conversation, or you can put it at 3 minutes and put a timer, set a timer. And let's see how quickly you can have conversation and share the information. So see how we're sharing information in different ways. And we're doing it whole class. Now we're taking a few students who seem, I've really got this. Let's have you retell, so it's good for them. Now that you've retold, great, we've had our conversation. Now I want the tables. I want someone from each table to give me an elevator conversation. Most students can relate to this one. I'm on floor 10 and I'm going to go to floor 1. You know how fast an elevator moves? And in those floors, I want you to tell me what they just told you. So this now gives the student a parameter of time. Okay, I've got 9 floors, so I want to make sure I get all my bullet points. I'm going to give you a few seconds at your table. Let's give you 30 seconds. And give me a few bullet points. You could give me 9 floors of an elevator. Great. It's kind of fun, too, for kids to think of that. Now, remember in life, there's always that thing you didn't quite hear or you didn't quite get. That's okay, because what we're going to do now as a class is we're going to have an opportunity to work on some of this work. And then at your table, I will have a system for those students to either put that green card or the red card to be able to indicate whether or not they're getting it. And then we can teach again. But do you see how I've alleviated everyone in the classroom from feeling like if I didn't get it right away, I'm never going to get it? There are many ways in which I'm building into my teaching that my students feel like, oh, I'm going to have a second chance at that. And if I didn't get it then, you know what, it's still okay with this teacher. And if I didn't get it then, amazingly enough, she's okay if I ask again. So I built in many ways that a student can ask questions and tell me, I didn't really understand that. If we build all of this into Tier 1, which is our general classroom, and it's good teaching practice, imagine how many students could avoid having to leave the classroom for a Tier 2 intervention if Tier 1 provided a lot more needs for our students. And we can open that door wider for our students by having good Tier 1 practices. It will make it much easier in the end for all of us. And think about the human cost of people who have, despite not receiving the help that they needed, who have tried to make success out of their lives, but it did not need to happen.
You know, in kindergarten and preschool, it was all project stuff. You know, it was putting together puzzles, and it's like, oh my goodness, look how fast this guy can do a puzzle, and look at these great objects that he's building and drawing. And you know, I felt really like a rock star. And then I get into first grade and I'm like, what's this reading stuff that I can't do very well? And I'm at the lowest, really? And then, you know, you get into second and third grade, fourth grade, and you're trying to memorize math facts, and you're just like, oh boy, I really had an over-exaggeration of what I thought my abilities were, because I'm obviously not as smart as the rest of the kids. And it was, you know, that formed my entire education. And I knew that I was spending a lot more time accomplishing the tasks that my peers were doing seemingly pretty easy. So then when I got into college, I realized that I was putting in like 2 or 3 times as much effort as my peers were. When we were doing assignments, I was spending 5-6 hours a day just to keep up, and eventually something had to give, and I had to drop out. And I had visions of being an architect, of being an engineer, and I realized that those were slipping through my fingers. So as an adult now, knowing that I have dyslexia, really only because my son was diagnosed a few years ago, it's like, I think I've got that same thing. And it really brought back a lot of not very pleasant memories of my elementary school experience. The struggles that I had in elementary school and not feeling very smart are the exact same things that my son is experiencing and has experienced. Is that those identifiers of who's smart and who isn't are the exact same thing that I struggled with. And nothing's changed in 40 years. There are better ways to teach students how to read, but I didn't benefit from that. But I'm so glad that my children are benefiting from that, and that they're able to make gains that I wasn't able to.
This classroom where students come every day, they spend more time with you during that school year than they do with anyone else. This ought to be the place where they receive help, where someone is concerned and understanding and trained to be able to provide those services.
For those of you who asked, this recording will be live on the Reading Horizons website as soon as tomorrow. So you will receive an email with a link, and you'll be able to print a certificate of attendance from there. Before we have Donell address a few of your questions, we'd like to remind all of you of the free giveaway for those attending live today. We will be giving away the power banks pictured here to 3 different winners. They're really cool. You can use them to charge your phone or your tablet. Enter your name and state code in the chat section to enter the drawing so we know you're here. We'll announce the winners in just a few minutes at the end of the webcast. Also, we're deep in the planning stages for our next webcast, so you can look forward to receiving an email invitation for that presentation once those details are finalized. So now we have Donell here in our office to answer your questions live. We had hundreds of questions submitted as people registered. Donell tried to cover as many of those questions in her presentation as possible. She will also address a few questions now, as well as a few of the questions that were submitted during the presentation. Again, keep in mind that a previous webcast that Donell presented for us, Dyslexia, What Every Educator Should Know, covered dyslexia screening and assessment, identification of dyslexia in the classroom, and books and resources about dyslexia for educators. So we won't be covering any of those questions that she addressed previously, but we invite you to go back and review that presentation for any questions you have on those topics, and that is on the Reading Horizons website or here on the Reading Horizons YouTube channel. One last note before we begin the question portion, all of the resources, including books and websites that were referenced throughout this presentation, will be included in slides that are going to come in that email. As long as you registered for this presentation, you'll receive that email as soon as the slides are available. If you didn't register, feel free to take a moment now or right after the presentation and register at www.readinghorizons.com/webcast. And now for the question portion. Hi, Donell. She's feeling a bit sick today, so I'm going to try not to stress you out too much. Let's start with this question. I really want to know the most effective way to help students read with dyslexia. It seems to help support students with holistic reading strategies instead of traditional decoding. Is it common for students with dyslexia to be more successful with these type of interventions?
Great, thank you. And my voice is a little different today, you guys. I will try to speak as clearly as possible. If by holistic you mean whole language, this has not proved to be effective with struggling readers who need to learn the code for English. Research shows that students with dyslexia have neurological impairments that require explicit and systematic interventions. The best decoding strategies are interactive and multisensory, and there are many very good research-based books that outline the best reading methods for students with dyslexia. The first and second webcasts refer to those methods.
The next question is, my state does not recognize dyslexia as a disability under its criteria, which is fairly common. How can teachers use reading instruction and accommodation to best help those students?
Yeah, several states do not yet have legislation regarding dyslexia. If teachers know how to recognize dyslexia and 504 plans and IEPs include the appropriate interventions and accommodations for a specific learning disability for reading, then these students can be supported with the services and strategies until there is more targeted language. Well-written legislation that supports dyslexia screening, assessment, intervention is a vital step in really overcoming our dismal reading outcomes.
And just a side note, if you are not a member of Decoding Dyslexia in your state has an organization. Look up Decoding Dyslexia's website, and they have a lot of resources as well. So our next question is, in addition to Orton-Gillingham approaches, supplementary intervention that may help with auditory processing and memory issues, what supplementary interventions are there?
Yeah, so that solid Orton-Gillingham-based reading intervention shows improvement with memory and processing. So there are lots of things that can be improved just by using a good solid Orton-Gillingham-based reading intervention. You'll find other things that come along like memory processing. But auditory processing challenges outside of poor sound to symbol that related to dyslexia should be addressed through specific tests that make sure there isn't a separate issue that has been overlooked.
Our next question, in my small rural district, we do not have an assessment tool for dyslexia. We only know for certain when a student has dyslexia when they receive a diagnosis from their doctor, which rarely happens. Sometimes these students are identified as having a specific learning disability, but there are times when they do not qualify in this category. I know that dyslexia is a fairly common condition. Is there a tool available, a screener, or any other way for teachers in a small rural school to determine whether a student has dyslexia aside from simply basing it on professional judgment?
Yes. So again, first I would recommend that you would view that previous webcast titled Dyslexia, What Every Educator Should Know. And this provides educators specifics about screening for dyslexia and other print-based disability. Today's webcast provides more information about criteria for serving a student under a 504 plan, which does not require an outside diagnosis. Essentially, there are a lot of very good resources, but it's on schools, administrators, teachers, and parents to figure out the best way to get to those services. Good dyslexia legislation also is a must, as we said before.
Next question. How can a student with dyslexia be accommodated on high-stakes tests like the ACT or the PSAT or SAT?
Yeah, really good question again. And this is the time of year when we're looking at that for those students who will be taking these high-stakes tests. And the answer is documentation. There are new ADA guidelines for school and work cover this process and what is needed for students to receive accommodations. And this can be accessed on the internet. Schools cannot wait until students are applying for these exams to demonstrate a need. As parents and teachers, we need to encourage our students to start early with getting documentation if they're going to need accommodations to be successful on those tests.
And how do schools fit this intervention into a regular school day with all the other requirements?
I know. This gets a lot more challenging as our students get older. They still have needs. It's very difficult to include interventions in the classroom if reading is not a school-wide priority. The most effective way to do so is by incorporating research-based teaching practices, a lot like those practices put in today that are just good for everyone, and providing strategies and choices that benefit all students. When teachers require that tasks and assessments can only be completed through reading and writing, they automatically limit students with disabilities. Hopefully today's webcast provided a starting point that can continue with educators sharing creative ways to support students with dyslexia in the regular classroom.
How do you provide phonological intervention for older students?
The most effective way, and sometimes the only way, is to provide phonological intervention for older and ELL students through software because of their busy schedules. And this allows students to work at their own pace and to receive the intervention they need without embarrassment and in a time-consuming way. One of the most important things we've learned at my school is how many of our middle and high school students lack even the very basic skills like vowel sounds. Many programs are too juvenile for older learners or don't start at the very beginning to build foundations, so it's very important to find programs that meet these specific needs. Teachers and administrators need to do their research. There are not a lot of programs out there that do this very well for older students, so we are at school are very fortunate to have the program we have.
Our next question. How much time should be spent in direct instruction reading programs versus in the general classroom? At what point, if any, do you stop giving differentiated texts for reading and provide audio supports instead?
I say you never stop helping a student learn to read. Most students, no matter their age, are capable of learning to read with the right program and instruction. Help your parents and students find community resources if none are available at your school. And in the meantime, help your students access the appropriate accommodations, whether that's through a 504 or an IEP.
Our next question is someone who just wants the best practices, as well as any insight on how to incorporate these best practices within a Montessori framework.
We use the Montessori framework in our K-3 classes at our school and have found that the best way to ensure instructional fidelity for reading is to introduce skills in whole class mini lessons and then reinforce at stations or rotations. Having software that matches the instruction so that students can work at their own pace is also extremely valuable. Following a proven methodology that is explicit, systematic, and multisensory with plenty of opportunity for practice of learned reading skills is the best way to teach students to read any framework.
What about compensatory students who are very smart and fool everyone into thinking they are not struggling with reading or any language issues?
Yeah, my husband fits description. He had been moved along through the school system for so long that he picked up many skills to hide his language-based struggles. Helping our students with dyslexia who have found ways to hide in plain sight takes patience, understanding, and solid information on the best instruction and support. This is the best way to gain an older student's trust after years of being ignored or treated as if it's a fault. Basically, if you have low reading scores, you're in middle school or high school, there is a reason and we need to look at it.
Does intervention require using rules-based instruction?
I think the assumption may be that rules-based instruction means drill and kill. Understanding the rules of the English language is important in the same way that math rules are important and rules for learning how to drive. This does not mean that teachers spend hours on worksheets or going over rules. Reading instruction can be very interactive and fun, particularly when the instruction is systematic and students gain new skills and begin to feel more confident.
Next question. I'm having a hard time getting my teachers to change their way of thinking. They still want everyone doing the same thing at the same time and be graded in the same way. Help!
I know this is very familiar. We do like things the way we like them. How is that working for them and their students? I guess that would be my first question. Probably not very well. Is there data to show them that teaching practices and strategies that are made one size fits all are working? I would guess not.
Should only trained special education teachers serve students who have an IEP?
Okay, and that is no longer really an option in inclusive classrooms. Most older students on IEPs will be in regular classrooms with regular education teachers. Some classroom teachers have become duly certified in special education based on additional coursework or by passing an exam. In some classes, there may be a special educator in the room to support students on IEPs. The bigger part of this question is the word trained. How many special education teachers have not received the training necessary to provide targeted instruction and intervention for students with dyslexia? Often students with dyslexia languish in special education programs for years with very little progress because they aren't receiving the type of intervention they need.
Should every student that has characteristics of dyslexia be on a 504 plan?
You need to make sure that appropriate testing has begun to indicate the need for a 504 plan versus an IEP. And then look at any testing or data to see exactly what the student is struggling with in school. If work completion has come to a halt, you need to make sure you understand why the student isn't successfully completing assignments. So writing a 504 without fully understanding how the accommodations are supposed to help won't be beneficial to the student.
Often the goals of remediation stop at decoding, and middle school students who are catching up in decoding find themselves off IEPs and not accessing grade level curriculum because their grade level peers have better fluency. Fluency is more than words per minute. What goals and interventions can improve fluency specific for kids with dyslexia?
Here I agree that fluency is more than words per minute. However, setting goals and intervention to improve fluency for students with dyslexia requires looking at more than just one set of measurements. Is the fluency hampered by decoding challenges? In that case, we would look at targeting instruction towards decoding lessons and activities that move directly to opportunities to practice those skills in reading. Or is the fluency hampered by years of inaccurate decoding that has become habitual? Excellent instruction and appropriate decoding skills and then targeted repeated reading with support can help in that case.
How can audio-assisted grade-level reading improve access and help fluency?
Audio-assisted grade-level reading allows students who may have received help with decoding but are still hampered by slow eye reading the opportunity to access appropriate text through audio. Comprehension based on information they receive auditorially is often a strength of dyslexic students. Additionally, with highlighted text, the student with dyslexia has an opportunity to practice decoding by hearing the text read accurately while seeing it highlighted. In other words, I think audio-assisted textbooks are fantastic and can be used in a lot of ways to help our students.
One final question. How do teachers know how to measure both access to curriculum and the success of reading fluency instruction?
Well, most general education teachers do not know how to measure access to curriculum and the success of reading fluency instruction. That's the short and honest answer. Most general education teachers are not addressing fluency beyond third grade. Typically, those two skills are addressed in separate classrooms with different teachers. The special education teacher may continue to address fluency if the reading scores come in low enough to be noticed by the school and appropriate testing is done. The general education teacher won't look at access to curriculum until they receive an IEP or 504 with specific instruction on accommodations. Since reading instruction in the United States has such a poor track record, the fact that we consider reading instruction done by the end of third grade is ridiculous. It's as if everything we know about reading instruction has a sell-by date that expires in third grade. Let's put an end to that widely held belief. Next, let's consider solid reading instruction with appropriate intervention for students with dyslexia part of every school's toolbox. Finally, let's charge all of our teachers, K through 12, with the task of being well-read in reading intervention throughout the grades. Once more educators have the explicit task of knowing enough about reading to find students with reading challenges, American public schools just might be a place where every student has a chance to learn to read with competency.
Actually, do you mind, Donell, one more question? We've got a question during the broadcast here. I'm going to steal this Post-it note from you that has a question written on it so I can see it. It says, are you aware of the legal responsibilities of college or other adult ed programs in regards to an IEP or 504?
Yes, and in fact, that's something that our high schools hopefully are becoming more versed in and finding that there's a responsibility to bridge that gap for our students between high school and college. And those college accommodations are going to be fulfilled through ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act. So I often say to my students who are at high school level who have an IEP or a 504, hang on to all that documentation that you received here at the high school. Your next best stop is going to be at the Office of Accommodation at the university or college of your choice where you're going to go to school. And do that long before you sign up for classes. Go into that Office of Accommodation, take all of the materials that you have that are your documentation of the services you've been receiving, and they will start a process there. Typically want to do their own testing, and they have a whole team that looks at that testing. But providing them that first step is often helpful, and do that, as I say, before you even register for classes. because once they do their testing and they come up with a system that they feel comfortable with to help you, they can also help you to decide on the teachers that will be best suited for your needs. So they can help you in a lot of ways in getting services. And even students who are in college who've been struggling and were never identified, please go to that Office of Accommodation even now to see if there's some way you might be able to get some help. Because it's, as I say, we never want to say it's too late. And let's always offer somebody the option or opportunity to receive some services or help.
Thank you so much, Donell. We're so grateful that you've been with us here today, even though you're sick. We appreciate you coming in. We'll share the winners of the giveaway here in just a moment. Thank you all so much for joining us. Your questions really did add a lot to the discussion and helped shape the presentation as you were submitting them. For any questions about the Reading Horizons program and how it can help your school or your district, please contact us at 1-800-333-0054 or visit our website at www.readinghorizons.com and fill out the Talk to a Specialist form on our site so you can see a full demo. And now it's time to announce the winners of our 3 power banks. The winners today are Bob from Illinois, Susan from Wisconsin, and Leah from California. Thank you all for participating. We will reach out to the 3 of you in the next couple of days to make sure you get those sent to you. We want to thank Donell for presenting not only today, but for her full series of webcasts. She truly has a wealth of knowledge and is a wonderful educator. If you registered for this webcast, you'll receive an email with the presentation, the slide deck, and you'll be able to request that certificate of attendance. You'll also receive a quick survey so you can give us some feedback on the presentation and let us know what other webcasts you might be interested in the future, so keep an eye on your inbox. If you want to learn even more from Donell, watch her previous webcasts on dyslexia. Also, be sure to stay in touch for more information on our next webcast. It'll be posted on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, then shared here on YouTube. So we encourage you to like and subscribe to be alerted to this great content as soon as it's available. If you registered for this webcast, you'll also receive an email invitation to that next webcast upcoming this spring. Thanks again, Donell, and to everyone who attended today. If you want to learn more about how Reading Horizons helps schools address the needs of their students with dyslexia, visit readinghorizons.com. Have a wonderful day.